learners, I am your mentor Paulumi Das, and today we are going to learn about developing critical reading skills. Have you ever felt that you have been massively influenced by a text, or that the author has colored your opinions in a manner you would have never expected? Or you had realized it much later that your thoughts and judgments had been influenced by the arguments of a persuasive piece of writing? Well, that means you have been exposed to some amount of influential written words. Think, did you accept the information or opinion or arguments in its face value because of the power and force of the words and the way it was written? Or did you actively and consciously wrestle with the text in your mind, and only then were you ready to accept its edicts? You might say a yes or a no to that, but while reading the text and processing its meaning and intention, you must have engaged in a substantial amount of critical reading, and I am sure you know that it is not an easy task at all. This makes it all the more important to teach our students how to develop critical reading habits, as we understand that it is a highly needed skill in both academic and everyday lives. As a skill that involves critical thinking competence, critical reading entails the process of understanding, questioning, and evaluating a text, carried out actively and consciously in order to well assess the accuracy and validity of a writer's idea. In order to well assess the accuracy and validity of the writer's ideas, a critical reader should be able to detect bias, prejudice, misleading information, and illogical conclusion in a text. Writers do not always write with the sole aim of communicating information, experience, or amusement. Texts such as editorials, opinion columns, advertisements, propaganda bulletins, sermons, and political statements are massively used instruments of persuasion. In general, there's nothing wrong to deal with persuasive texts. However, it's misleading to unknowingly allow yourselves to be influenced by another person just because we have passively absorbed other people's opinions without trying to find for ourselves whether the argument or information is truly sound or not. Hence, it is imperative to train young minds to develop critical reading skills in addition to the literal and literary reading skills now, even more than before, because we live in the times of advanced technology and widespread expansion of information and misinformation. Let us understand critical reading a bit more. John Dewey's and Paulo Freire's democracy-seeking views on education have inspired many scholars, researchers, and teachers who were fascinated with helping learners have their voices heard. The banking approach to education hinders learners from thinking critically by imposing on them a passive stance which makes them adaptive to the status quo. Critical pedagogy rejects the banking concept of education and aims at liberating students from the confines of those classrooms in which the teacher is traditionally expected to transfer knowledge to students, while students receive and accept information, right or wrong, without deserving the right to question the authenticity of the knowledge being transferred. Critical reading is an area which has been the center of attention of critical pedagogues for many years. Several scholars and researchers have made attempts to incorporate or encourage the inclusion of critical reading indicators in reading programs, and has led to various theories that view reading as a process of not just extracting meaning from a text, but a process of connecting information in the text with the knowledge the reader brings to the act of reading. Grabbe, in his essay Discourse Analysis and Reading Instruction, defines critical reading as a dialogue between the reader and the text, and Tierney and Pearson see it as an active cognitive process in which the reader's background knowledge plays a key role in the creation of meaning, as explained in their essay, Learning to Learn from Text, a framework for improving classroom practice. Thus, reading is not a passive mechanical activity, but purposeful and rational, dependent on the prior knowledge and expectations of the readers, and involves a great deal of critical thinking. Critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively analyzing, questioning, judging, and evaluating information obtained from texts, experience, and reflection. It equips a person with the ability to distinguish between facts and opinions, judgments and inferences, and objective and subjective impressions. To extend the ideas of critical thinking to critical reading, it can be defined as an active and purposeful process of comprehending, questioning, and evaluating printed material, and in order to react intelligently to the reader's ideas. In his piece, What is Critical Reading?, Kurland explains that critical reading refers to a careful, active, reflective, analytic reading, which involves reflecting on the validity of what one has read in light of his prior knowledge and the understanding of the world. Let us speculate. If a reader, a critical reader, I must say, will that person question and detect the use of overgeneralization in the following statement? A statement like, children do not take care of their old parents these days. 3 friends of mine have left their old parents in old age homes. Although the writer of this text provides a factual statement to support his opinion, it is not enough. 3 people who have put their parents in old age care homes do not confirm that all children treat their old parents similarly, or even that old age homes are a miserable place to live in, or that old people living in these community spaces have a bad life. To take another example, a critical reader will presumably find it easy to judge this statement. Mr. XYZ is a leading and successful entrepreneur. There's no doubt he will make our nation prosperous. Vote for him in the upcoming election. The use of the propaganda technique called transfer in this statement is very clear. One's success in leading a business or company doesn't guarantee his success to lead a nation. These illustrations hint us towards 2 salient features of critical reading. Number 1, critical reading involves questioning and challenging our beliefs and values. It is likely that the text we are reading might challenge our attitudes, our unconsciously held beliefs, or our positions on current issues. Thinking critically in the academic sense involves being open-minded, using judgment and discipline to process what we are learning about without our personal bias or opinion detract from the arguments. Critical thinking involves being rational and aware of our own feelings on the subject, being able to reorganize our thoughts, prior knowledge and understanding to accommodate new ideas and viewpoints. Number 2, critical reading entails detecting the author's possible bias and prejudices. While reading the text, the reader can ask the following questions. Number 1, is the author making claims to evaluate or demean one social, ethnic, national, religious, or gender group as compared to another, or all others? Or the second question that could be asked is, does the author consciously present evidence that serves to tell only one side of an issue, withholding or shedding light on the opposite view? Does the author consciously present evidence that serves to tell only one side of an issue, withholding or shedding light on the opposing view? Let us now decode the process of critical reading. Critical reading is basically nothing more than consistently asking relevant, critical questions to the text one is encountering. And since different kinds of texts may demand different types of thinking or reaction on part of the reader, a fixed procedure for critical thinking cannot be formulated. There are several questions to consider when approaching a reading. The following critical questions are suited for most kinds of printed matter. Questions about the author. What is the author's main aim or point on purpose? Questions about the author. What is the author's main theme or point or purpose? Is the author making any particular assumption? On what authority? Which aspects does the author focus on and why? Does he or she omit any important point? Are there additional clues about the author's attitude or stance? From his or her position or qualifications, country of origin, the text's date of publication or publisher, the type of the text, etc. What theoretical perspective has the author taken? For example, which writers does he or she cite most often or most approvingly? What basis or criteria is the author using to make these judgments? Questions that could be asked about the content are: who is the target reader? What is the main point or thesis or argument? What is the text really about? The special agenda, underlying themes, etc. What explanations or supporting evidence are drawn on? Do they seem adequate, completely relevant? Are the statements fact or opinion? Is all the factual information correct? What aspect of the topic has the author chosen to focus on? What has he omitted? What are the author's assumptions? Are they explicitly or implicitly stated? Is there any evidence of deliberate bias? Is there any particular philosophy that influences the author's view? Does any idea or information interest, confuse, or intrigue us? What is the relationship, if any, of the author's ideas to my own experience? What analogies exist in the reading? What comparison can I make of present reading with previous reading? What inference might I draw from the knowledge I have gained? There are questions that one can ask about the structure of the text. What is the structure of the text? What does the structure of the text reveal? Is the framework clear? That is, different theories compared to a preferred theory. How is the content developed? Is the material developed historically, in order of importance, in terms of a debate? What are the cause and effect relationships, if any? How does the conclusion relate to the rest of the material? Does the conclusion work logically, and is it representative of the findings? And finally, these are the questions you can ask about the style of the text. In what style has the material been written? For example, is it formal, informal, analytical, narrative, persuasive, argumentative, or didactic? How do the style and format influence your reaction to the material? These questions have been selectively taken from the Monash University resource on study skills. Now that we know what questions to ask a text, let us learn some techniques to promote critical reading skills among our students. To be able to effectively apply the questions into practice, students need to master the critical reading sub-skills so that they can recognize and implement them while reading actual texts. Let us discuss some crucial critical reading sub-skills as categorized by P. Pardeed in his 2007 conference paper, Developing Critical Reading in EFL Classrooms. Number 1. Distinguishing fact from opinion. Texts in general are a combination of statements of opinions and statements of fact. However, unlike statements of opinion, statements of facts can be tested for accuracy through our own personal observations or through examining historical records, scientific reports, and veritable data. The ability to distinguish facts from opinions is a very necessary skill to develop, since it helps readers decide whether an author's opinion is justified or unjustified. While an opinion justified with a number of convincing facts is worthy of serious consideration, an opinion that lacks factual support should be treated with skepticism and caution. Number 2, interpreting connotation of words. Writers often use highly connotative language in their attempt to appeal to the emotions of their readers in order to make their ideas acceptable, believable, persuasive, and convincing, or to influence their readers' thinking. They are aware of the truth that it is not always what we say, but how we say it that influences people. To avoid being influenced without being aware of it, readers should think about the connotations of the words used. To understand how connotation changes with the word usage, let us take the example of 2 reviews from the same book as used by Pardeed in his 2007 conference paper. Number 1, The White Hotel by D.M. Thomas is a highly imaginative novel. Reading it, I entered into a dream world filled with the most extraordinary and unique fantasies. The second one, The White Hotel by D.M. Thomas is a highly unrealistic novel filled with the most extraordinary and eccentric fantasies. Reading it, I felt as if I were in a weird nightmare. In the first description, as you would have noticed, phrases like highly imaginative and unique fantasies are used because they have positive associations that might persuade someone to buy the book. In the second description, the author has a very different intention in mind and therefore employs phrases like highly unrealistic, eccentric fantasies because they usually have a negative connotation. Number 3, discovering the author's point of view. Apart from the 2 tools discussed before, writers sometimes use a special point of view, or the point through which the author considers, presents, or communicates his messages or ideas. Due to the fact that someone's perception and consideration are highly influenced by his political inclination, religion, sex, nationality, or geographic background, some writers are bound to be biased. That is why recognizing the writer's point of view is critical for readers in order to detect his purposes and biases. Number 4, recognizing crooked and fallacious thinking. To help readers to read critically, Pardeed explains that we need to make our students familiar with the following 12 common crooked and fallacious thinking tropes that writers sometimes use to persuade and consciously take advantage of the general ignorance and weakness of their readers. So, anytime we find any of these in our text, readers should be extra cautious. Hasty or overgeneralizations, attack on a person, appeal to the emotions, circular argument, false analogy, equivocation, either or assumption, presenting what is as what ought, jumping from a non-inclusive proposition to an inclusive conclusion, supposing the whole to be like the parts, asking false questions, taking what are mere coincidence to be the causes. Number 5, detecting propaganda devices. The Encyclopedia Britannica 2008 defines propaganda as the more or less systematic effort to manipulate other people's beliefs, attitudes, or actions by means of symbols that includes words, gestures, banners, monuments, music, clothing, insignia, hairstyles, designs on coins and postage stamps, and so forth. A propagandist usually appeals to the reader's emotions, and therefore they often don't recognize it when they see it. So, if we make our students recognize propaganda when they see it by detecting the following 7 common propaganda devices, our problem eases out a little. They are glittering generalities, name-calling, transfer, testimonial, plain folks, card stacking, and bandwagon. Number 6. Recognizing statistical slips. Most readers are not very acute judges of mathematical terms and concepts. Therefore, it is fairly easy for writers who present facts to the public through mathematics to deceive the average reader. The following are the common statistical slips that readers must be acquainted of in order to guard themselves against being misled by misused statistics. Deceptive sample, misleading average, plausible charts and graphs, presentation of facts without a reference point. Number 7. Making inference. Inferencing is a mental process by which we reach a conclusion based on specific evidence. It is very crucial in reading because readers get much of what they understand through a text indirectly or by inferencing. A text, its words in abstraction do not mean anything. Readers construct meaning by what they bring to the process of the reading. Readers draw on the knowledge of the language and of conventions of social communication. They also draw on other factors such as knowledge of the author, the occasion, and the audience. They infer unstated meaning based on social conventions, shared knowledge, shared experience, and shared values. They make sense of remarks by recognizing implications and drawing conclusions. Number 8. Outlining what is important and summarizing. Outlining and summarizing are especially helpful strategies for understanding the content and the structure of a reading selection. Outlining reveals the basic structure of the text, and summarizing synopsises the main argument in brief. Both these strategies later help in annotating and making notes. The key to both outlining and summarizing is being able to distinguish between the main ideas and the supporting ideas and examples. The main ideas forms the backbone, the strand that holds the various parts and pieces of the text together. Number 9. Evaluating an argument. An argument has 2 essential parts, a claim and a support. The claim asserts a conclusion, an idea, an opinion, a judgment, or a point of view, and the writer wants the reader to accept it. The support can include reasons, which could be shared beliefs, assumptions, and values, and evidence, which could be facts and statistics and authorities that give readers the basis for accepting the conclusion. When we assess an argument, we are concerned with the process of reasoning as well as its truthfulness. At the most basic level, in order for an argument to be acceptable, the support must be appropriate to the claim and the statements must be consistent with one another. Finally, the other factors that are crucial for critical reading are being able to discover the author's competence, intention, attitude, and bias, to figure out the time and policies of publication, and to identify the target readers. The reader's realization of these factors will enable them to decide whether a text is worth reading or not. For example, an argument presented in a text printed 50 years ago should be practically ignored because its logic is now outdated and inappropriate. To give another example, a book about practical tips for traveling written by a person who is well traveled himself is more reliable than one written by a person who hardly travels. But how do we put these sub-skills into practice? Well, when each of these factors or sub-skills are familiar enough to our students, we can assign them texts designed to empower them to detect and consider the presence of connotative meaning, fallacious thinking, propaganda techniques, etc. incorporated within the text. This is a crucial intervention from teachers, as the incorporation of the elements of critical thinking into materials always encourages learners to question texts and add linguistic value to the textbook and classrooms. When they have finished doing this, they can discuss what they have got with their classmates. This is step 2. Such an activity instills the habit of involving critical thinking in reading. After finishing this second step, students can be assigned to read authentic texts which contain more complex biases, prejudices, faulty reasoning, misinformation, and illogical conclusions. Along with this, teachers can ask students to answer WH questions dealing with the material they have read, rather than the close or yes-no questions. These questions require students to think deeply and use complex language to respond, and thus this promotes the students' critical thinking abilities. Therefore, rather than quitting the effort of comprehension or inference making when challenged by a difficult text, students should learn to find interest and curiosity in decoding them. This flowchart succinctly outlines the process of critically reading difficult texts. You can share this with your students so that when they want to tackle complex texts, they can go step by step. You can share this schema with your students to help them tackle difficult texts. First, they have to break the reading into portions. Then, skim the text and getting an overview. Then, they can flag what they do not understand so that they could read it later. Then they have to go to the library or other resources to help them understand the meaning. Then, they will also have to make notes while they read the text and also the supported material. They can also talk to people, friends, colleagues and teachers to make sense of the meaning of the text. And through all these processes, what they do not need to do is not to panic. This discussion brings us to the end of today's session. Hope you enjoyed learning. Goodbye.